That lift after something sweet was never really the sugar. Something else in your body was quietly doing that work the whole time, and nobody ever named it for you. The real story is slower and steadier than a rush, running behind the scenes from the very first bite. And at this stage of life, that quiet system runs a little differently than it used to, which is exactly why the same treat can hit harder now. Stick around, because once you see what's really behind that jolt, you'll understand your own body a little better. Sugar gives you energy is a phrase almost everyone picked up long before they ever read a nutrition label, at birthday parties, at soda breaks, at candy bars unwrapped between errands. It's not wrong exactly. It's just aimed at the wrong part of the story. The real story turns out to be more interesting than the shorthand version, and it explains something almost everyone has actually felt after eating something sweet. That familiar lift is real. So is the slump that tends to follow it. None of that is only about sugar sitting on your tongue. It's about what your body does with it once it's already inside you. And that response looks a little different today than it did years ago. This isn't a story that stays the same for life. What sugar actually hands your cells has almost nothing to do with that quick lift most people chase it for. The real reason sits somewhere else entirely. And the part that changes the most, the part almost nobody talks about, is how differently this whole pattern behaves once you've been living in this body for a few extra decades. Glucose really is a serious fuel for the body's cells. Once it's broken down through a chain of chemical steps inside those cells, a single molecule of it can generate somewhere around 30 units of the energy currency your body runs on. The brain leans on that fuel especially hard, pulling in something like 100 grams of it a day just to keep going, more than almost any other tissue in you. That energy doesn't show up all at once either. Glucose first gets broken apart inside the cell. Then it's handed off to tiny compartments called mitochondria, which spend several more chemical steps converting it into something your muscles and organs can actually run on. It's less like flipping a switch and more like a small production line working in the background. That fuel keeps every cell in your body running at every moment, not in a single burst tied to one snack. It's closer to background power than to a spike you'd actually notice. Cells don't sit idle waiting on a candy bar to keep them going. They've been running the whole time using whatever fuel is already circulating. Think about a full pantry for a second. Having the shelves stocked doesn't make dinner appear the moment you walk through the door. The food still has to be pulled out, prepped, and cooked before it does anything for you. Sugar works the same way once it's inside you. It adds to what's already on the shelf, but turning that into something you can use still takes time, and your body handles that on its own, mostly out of view. So that quick lift so many of us have learned to associate with something sweet was never actually the fuel showing up in real time. It just felt that convincing in the moment. Your cells were never waiting around for it in the first place. What you actually feel after that first bite comes from somewhere else in the body entirely, and that's a very different story than the one about fuel. Once sugar reaches your bloodstream, the rise happens fast. Blood glucose climbs within minutes of that first bite, peaks somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes later, and then insulin goes to work, bringing it back down. How sharp that rise and fall looks depends heavily on how the sugar arrived to begin with. A soda or a piece of candy on its own tends to spike and drop harder and faster than the same sugar eaten as part of a fuller plate. That slump afterward has a real mechanism behind it. Rising glucose can quiet the brain cells responsible for keeping you alert and awake, and insulin's ripple effects nudge brain chemistry toward relaxation rather than sharpness. Put those two things together, and you get the heavy, sleepy feeling a lot of people notice after something sweet, especially later in the day. Researchers have actually tested this directly, comparing carbohydrates against a placebo under controlled conditions, pulling together results from 31 separate studies and well over 1,000 people. They didn't find a mood or energy boost at any point afterward. If anything, people felt more tired and less alert in the hour after eating. The lift itself is real. It's just never been sugar handing over the energy. A soda on its own hits your system fast and produces the sharpest version of this pattern, a real spike followed by a real crash. Folded into a full meal, that same curve flattens out a lot. That's exactly why serving something sweet at the end of a meal, rather than on its own, was never just about taste. That same jolt and slump doesn't always feel the same size. Some years, it's barely noticeable. Other years, it lands like a truck. And that difference has everything to do with what's coming next in your own body. That system I just described, the one balancing insulin and blood sugar every time you eat, doesn't do the same amount of work forever. It changes with you. As the decades go by, most people's bodies carry a little more weight around the middle than they used to. The cells in the pancreas that release insulin have to work harder to keep pace with that shift. The result is simple enough. The same treat can produce a bigger swing and a longer one than it did at 30. For women, there's an added piece to this. Estrogen spends years quietly helping insulin do its job, supporting how efficiently the body clears sugar from the blood. Losing that hormone around menopause removes some of that support, which is part of why the shaky, wired then tired feeling can become a lot more familiar around that transition. This reaches far beyond one slice of cake or the sugar stirred into your coffee. It follows any full plate, sweet or not, because the same insulin system is working behind every meal you eat. The bigger that swing gets, the sooner it can nudge you toward feeling hungry again, often before the last meal has any business wearing off. It's worth noticing before reaching for something sweet out of habit. None of this means something has gone wrong in you. It means a well-regulated system is doing more work than it used to after running for a long time, which is about as normal as physiology gets. Plenty of home cooks have felt this shift firsthand without ever needing a name for it. Maybe that's a man noticing dessert hits differently once he's past 60, or a woman recognizing the same thing once menopause changed her own rhythm. There are a few separate pieces on the table now. What sugar actually fuels, what that spike and dip really are, and how that whole response shifts the longer you've been alive. On their own, they're interesting facts. Together, they explain something you've probably felt for years without ever quite naming it. Put those pieces together, and a clearer picture shows up. Sugar really is fuel for your cells. But the feeling you actually notice comes from how your insulin and brain chemistry react to how fast that fuel shows up, not from the fuel itself. And that reaction, the regulating system doing the reacting, is exactly the part that runs bigger and slower with age. That sugar rush people have talked about for decades was never sugar handing over energy. It was always the regulating system responding to how quickly sugar arrived. And that response is the part that's changed, not the sugar itself. Nothing about a candy bar is different than it was 30 years ago. The same soda that produced a mild, easy lift decades ago can produce a sharper spike and a heavier slump now. Sugar isn't what changed. What changed is the system reacting to it, running the same job with a little less room to spare than it used to have. This is exactly why an old habit was doing genuine work long before anyone had a word for insulin. That habit was simple. Never serve something sweet on an empty stomach, and always pair it with something that has real protein or fat. It wasn't a superstition. It was a system nobody could see, being managed by people who'd simply noticed what worked. And it matters even more now than it did back then. So that's the real system, sugar as fuel, and your own chemistry, deciding how it actually feels. The simplest way to work with it is the same one cooks have used for years. Pair something sweet with real protein or fat instead of eating it alone, especially now. The subscribe button's right there, and it means the next one like this finds you.